Hello everyone. In these series of PowerPoints, we are going to be looking at how the South changed in politics, technology, and in business. First, politically, how did the South change? They had to redeem themselves, and they needed to look at how is this new South going to look, especially for Georgia. And this new South term was coined and phrase used by Henry Grady as his role as the editor of the Atlanta Constitution. And he felt that the South needed to industrialize and create new industries within the South. And so we move into what's known as the Redemption Era, where Georgia is redeeming itself from the hardships that followed the Civil War, and especially from the leadership of the Republican Party that ruled during Reconstruction. Most of this redemption is led by a group of men called the Bourbon Triumvirate. Now, where does this name Bourbon Triumvirate come from? Well, Bourbon is the name for a French word for the castle, and triumvirate is a ruling body of three, so a castle of three rulers. So it's kind of referring back to these men as kind of like kings, that they were ruling everything in Georgia during this time period. They really wanted strong economic bonds with the industrial North, but they still wanted to keep a lot of the old Southern values. They were definitely white supremacists. They did not favor rights for African Americans, nor did they favor rights for poor whites. The three Bourbon Triumvirate members were Joseph Brown was the first, and he was born into poverty. He was a teacher, a lawyer, and then later became a judge. In fact, he even served as governor of Georgia before, during, and after the Civil War. So he wasn't fighting in the Civil War, so he's not a soldier. He tried to support Reconstruction efforts in Georgia to try to shorten it and get Georgia reconstructed and back into the Union so they could rebuild their economy. After his term as governor, he becomes a very successful railroad businessman and becomes very, very wealthy. The second Bourbon Triumvirate member is Alfred H. Colquitt. He was the son of a U.S. Senator. During the Civil War, he served as a Confederate general and then later becomes governor of Georgia in 1876. He was a wealthy farmer and businessman during Reconstruction, so he's making a lot of money off of the changes that occurred during the state during the Reconstruction period. After serving as governor, he later becomes a member of the U.S. Senate in 1883 and 1888. The third member of the Bourbon Triumvirate is John B. Gordon, who was also a Confederate general. It's often said that he was the head of the Georgia chapter of the KKK, so definitely a white supremacist working to suppress African American rights. He served as a U.S. Senator in 1872, again, also very wealthy through railroads. And he was also governor of Georgia in 1886. And during that time period, he did help reduce the state debt and brought a lot of industry to Georgia, but he didn't work on rights for African Americans or poor whites. Now, despite the faults of the Bourbon Triumvirate, they did have a lot of successes. They really did improve Georgia's economy during the Reconstruction period because Georgia, remember, they were agricultural before the war. The Triumvirate brings a lot of industry to the state, really improving the economy, helping get rid of some of the war debts. And they helped lower taxes as well. So they're expanding business and industry and helping the state greatly economically. But their failures is they just did not help the poor, especially those tenant farmers. They weren't working towards public education. They didn't provide any state funds for that, so unless you had money, you really weren't getting an education during this time period. Even though they brought industry in, they gave no regulations for those companies to have their industrial factories and things like that. So it was really poor, dangerous, unhealthy, unsanitary working conditions in the factories. Another big failure of theirs were prisons, because now the prison population is about 90% black, because blacks were sent to prison if they didn't have jobs, and so that increased the black prison population greatly, because under the black codes, if blacks didn't have jobs, they could be arrested and sent to prison. And so kind of almost like a form of slavery comes about under the Bourbon Triumvirate, which is the convict lease system. They begin to lease prisoners to companies for labor, and people would purchase these leases of different prisoners, and they were told that they needed to provide them with housing and food and medical care. And in return, the prisoner would work for the company, the factory, the farm, whatever it may be, whoever leased the prisoner out. But often the company would not provide the appropriate housing or food or medical care. And most of the convict lease system prisoners were leased to two of the three companies that were owned by the Triumvirate, which were railroad and construction companies. So they were profiting from this system themselves, helping them become even more wealthy. So when you think about the Triumvirate members, you're really thinking about some really corrupt guys. They were really doing some unethical government and business practices. That is it for this portion of our Progressive Era Unit presentation, Part 1. Please complete the note sheets as you're viewing these presentations. There will be two additional parts to this that will help you complete the note sheets, and these will, of course, are all posted on Edmodo. And if you have any questions, please direct them towards me in class or via Edmodo.